Hello, welcome back to Blender Sushi LiveNoding. In this episode, I will be talking about shader, texture, and how you can loop it. I've been experimenting with video texture for AR. So basically, this is one of the results. The other day, I went out and create this augmented reality with video texture animating on Susan head. Okay, so the texture, it looks like just like a swimming texture. So it's nothing spectacular, but it's actually quite interesting. The actual texture is looking like this. So I'm animating the
I'm
something.
not sure I am.
I'm animating something that looks like a texture. It's a Voronoi mixture of Voronoi and Musgrave, and I actually don't want it to just like doing a swimming. I want to do more. So the one that's kind of like a swimming. If you look at the texture, it's just looking something like this. But this is one of the setup using Eevee or cycles nodes, where the texture is actually looping and repeating seamlessly on every side. But this works only in 2D. Okay, so that's one thing. There's another one that's actually still rendering in the background while I'm talking. So this one is also using Musgrave and Voronoi. This one is using 3D texture, but it's not just swimming. It's actually doing the procedural texture 4D animations. So I want to share actually some of those. The one that's just planar and looping is actually looking a little bit like this. Let me open it. Okay, that's Susan head, and this is animation nodes doing its thing. Like there's a multiply and modulo, and the animations, if I play it back while it's rendering, hopefully it doesn't crash because I'm recording and I have two Blender open and rendering. So this is the original swimming texture. This one is actually, this one you cannot see the seam, so that's actually good. That's the good part. So we are talking about seam in terms of 2D texture, U and V, and also talking about how we can use 3D texture and animate it as a 4D texture. So animating texture basically, but I'm trying actually to just loop the beginning and the ending as well. So it's slightly complicated to explain, but anyhow, I'm using animation nodes, and I'm basically targeting one of the number here. Okay, I'm actually animating the x value from 0 to 1. So that's what's going on here. So I'm using the generated texture nodes. This goes into the mapping so I can scale it. I'm also scaling the vector. This one is using cycles and Eevee, of course, and separating into sine and cosine. Combine it back as a vector for noise, and Musgrave and Voronoi again. It's a and this is the result. It's slightly more complicated, but I think the easier to explain is if I'm using the other setup, where I'm also using animation nodes. So it's just like a time frame. I multiply the time, and this goes into this expression. I'm targeting the 4D value of the Musgrave texture. So you can see this is a 4D Musgrave texture, and this gonna wrap around nicely. You cannot see the seam of the monkey head, and I'm animating the W value. And if I play back this guy, so from 250 and go back to 0, it's not actually 100% looping, but it's actually not too bad. So I'm using the texture coordinate generated instead of UV, because if I'm using UV, we can start to see the seam. We don't actually want that. We want to bake the procedural texture while it's using the generated coordinate. When we bake it, the result of this Musgrave Voronoi bake is actually looking something like this. So it's seamless. Okay, so this is what we want. This is what I'm gonna be using. I will be exporting it out as video and using that video as a texture for my AR. And it's interesting because if you change the objects, like change it to cube, and you want to use this texture, of course this cube will have a different UV, so you need to bake it separately. So this is the UV. Maybe in the future we can actually kind of bake it on the fly, or just using like a shader nodes for the AR objects. That's really just something that's gonna happen. So anyway, so yeah, animating using animation nodes. I didn't talk much about it, but this is actually also quite important. So animation nodes is running, and I have 3 Blender running and rendering, and actually have another Blender running here. It's working quite fast. So I can control the Musgrave texture W value. I can change this Voronoi value and actually change it to 40 and actually animate the W as well. This will create something that's quite psychedelic. So this W, if you want to control it using animation nodes, it's pretty easy. Again, using just expression node. I use these nodes quite often. And then Command Option Shift C, and then just Command V here. It's gonna grab that attribute value, and then we can control it using animation nodes. It's basically like a driver. So I just plug it into X, and we just need to specify here equal X. So we have this kind of psychedelic result. Yeah, I thought that's pretty cool. It's really simple to make as well, thanks to this ability to use 4D. I don't know if noise also have 4D. It might have, yeah, it has 4D. If you are using noise, the result of this Musgrave will be slightly different. Wait a few seconds because it needs to calculate this and rendering this out. So this is using noise, and we can animate the W. So it's less jumpy compared to Voronoi. But you can always plug Voronoi distance or Voronoi W into the noise and get a different result. So these 3 probably you will use quite often if you are playing around with cycles and Eevee. Maybe use the distance. Or maybe unplug this, plug the color into the vector. but because we want to animate, maybe animate the W using animation nodes. Oh, okay, so that's what we get. File, save. This is more, okay, maybe the title of this live noding is animating, creating video texture for AR. So this one you can animate the noise. You can see here. If I animate the Voronoi one, it's kind of jumpy, but if you're animating the noise, it's kind of nicely blending, which is pretty interesting. So maybe instead of animating the Voronoi here, let's just switch to this guy. Command Option Shift C, paste it here. Oh, paste. And change the value into really small, something really small. Okay, maybe even smaller. So it should do the blending. Zero 0.02. Oh, maybe it's because this guy moved too fast. You cannot see the blending. Yeah, there we go. So Musgrave, maybe scale the Musgrave. Okay, that's kind of nice now. It's starting to look like something that's quite beautiful. And I kind of wonder when I want to render this out and use it for my AR project. So this one is looping. There is no seam at the beginning, but we cannot see the seam on the UV. And then there's we can also, okay, it pops at the end, but it's not too bad actually, because you can see the pattern is not too much different. It's just like the color changing, and then we have this kind of segmentation or quantizations of color. So that's not bad. Yeah, we don't need to animate the Voronoi one. We can choose a different Voronoi. But that's just gonna change the detail. Pretty cool. All right. Thanks again. Hopefully this is useful for you. Thanks again for tuning in, and I'll see you next time. Thank you. Bye.